Most people may only try game meat like venison if they're connected to hunting.
But one soup kitchen in Augusta gave attendees a special lunch today with the help from a unique outreach program. Grace Bradley takes us there.
Hunting is a cultural staple here in Maine, and in Augusta today, one soup kitchen is including that culture in the meal.
Today we're excited to have the Outdoor Channel and Spectrum come in for Hunt.Fish.Feed.
Hunt.Fish.Feed is a program that we created about a decade ago to connect the homeless and the hungry with an underutilized food source, which is game, fish, and meat.
We are feeding some hungry people here in Augusta, Maine, a wonderful venison sloppy joe meal. We have a little rosemary and bacon infused potato salad, a little fruit salad, and I believe there's ice cream bars for dessert.
One of the programs in the state of Maine, which is the Hunters for the Hungry program. If we want to build out our infrastructure so that Maine can be more resilient for providing protein to ourselves, we really need to bring federal investments that are going to big national corporations back to regional small farms and processing facilities.
Game is the purest, cleanest protein you can find.
Not to mention that it's about 60% less fat and less cholesterol, and has twice the amount of protein than does domestic beef.
There are far more people that are hungry out there that are in need of a high quality protein that hunters and fishermen provide through their harvesting of game, and just trying to bring some attention to what the Bread of Life folks are doing.
We started with a soup kitchen almost 40 years ago, and then we have 2 homeless shelters across town. One is a veteran shelter and one's a family shelter that holds about 54 people. And then we have 83 housing units across the city of Augusta.
People like these people here that volunteer their time to help people that they don't even know. To me, that's a big thing.
The mission of this organization is to feed, shelter, and empower people to change their lives, and we're here to do it every day.